Hi everybody. Today I'll show you a little something that I show to the tour groups that come out to our LifeGiving Farm, the farm that gives us life. And it's a display panel of some of the history of the LifeGiving Farm, focusing on one of the two aspects of it that are primary. Of course, one aspect would be growing food and cultivating some crops, but the bigger part of it, the 3 out of the 5 acres, is habitat restoration, and even in the other 2 acres where we cultivate, we have an interface with wild plants and trees and wetlands and whatnot. So what this display focuses on is the regenerative aspects and the habitat restoration that we've done over the last 37 years since 1985. So I have photos up here from 1985 to 2022. And this is, I should say, well, actually what I should say first is acknowledging where we are here. We're on the traditional homelands of the Salish and Kootenai and Kalispel or Ponderay people in western, what they call Montana, the Rocky Mountains. And I should also say, as a more indigenous perspective land acknowledgement, it's also the homeland of bear and deer and elk and coyotes and squirrels and the eagles and the magpies and all of our other relations who call this place home. So we came here in 1985, Barb and I and our kids from Oregon, as I came to be a teacher in the tribal alternative high school here, the Salish and Kootenai Tribal High School. And for many years before that, we'd already done a lot of organic gardening, but it had always been something on the side, going back to 1970, really, when we were living in communes and all that. But it was always something as a supplement to our lives, and we still lived with money and careers and all of that, teaching and whatnot. And so it wasn't till I retired from teaching in 2018 that this became a full-time activity with the goal of living directly from the land with minimum use of money and phasing out the use of money. And over the years, we've gone, pause. What I was saying is, over the years from 1985 until retirement, those 33 years, this was primarily just kind of a pastime for supplementing our lives, and now our food intake and all of that, and some herbal medicines as well. And then in 2018, the goal changed, and actually my goal had already shifted in the 4 years before I retired. I realized in 2014 that we needed to live independently of a system that doesn't really have much of a future. Collapse is what I'm talking about, which I refer to in some of the articles on the blog you can read about that. I'm not going to go into that right now, but Paths Forward is the best one now. I've got a new one that'll be done soon, but Paths Forward and The End of Money, those two articles. So, so the next year, 2019, January, I began keeping track of how much of our food is from what we grow, what we gather in the wild, and what we trade with others who do the same kind of thing. And that would be mostly meat from our daughter's boyfriend, who's a Salish hunter with a high degree of knowledge and skill of hunting, so we trade for deer and elk and moose meat with them, giving them the vegetables and the, some eggs from the chickens and that kind of thing. So I'll just real briefly, what I started writing it down in January of 2019, and so for these past 4 years, this is what has transpired. 2019, 14.5% of our food intake was from those items. Cultivating, gathering in the wild, which includes hunting and fishing, as well as berries and all the wild foods. And 14.5% for that year, I think, was probably pretty close to what we'd always been doing in all of the previous years, you know, but things really changed dramatically the next year. 2020, the average for the year went way up to 27.7%, largely due to the pandemic keeping us home, keeping us from going into towns and going to any restaurants and that kind of thing. So that was a big jump. 2021 also saw a considerable rise, not as high as the previous year, and that was up to 35.1%. And then 2022, we got up to 47%. So that's pretty close to half. And at that rate of increase, where we're depending more on the gifts of nature than on money and stores and the supply chain and all that, I think this coming year that just started, 2023, should put us well over half from the natural sources for our food. So with that said, I'll go over some of these images here, and they're all dated, showing you what changed over time in the land. And if you want to see more of the gardens and the actual garden tour that I do after I show people this, you can see that in several articles on the blog. Okay. So I didn't really start taking a lot of these photos until 2003, as you'll see. So I have several from when we first moved here, the first 3 or 4 years. And then that thing that happens called a career kind of took me away from it for a while. And so I'll tell you in a little while what happened in 2002 that got me to start recording more of the changes in the land. So as you can see, when we first got here in 1985, there weren't all of the trees and crops and everything that we have now, and infrastructure that you can see here in the photo there, that didn't exist. And so that's where we started from. And right there is the spot where we planted our first garden, which you can see, our first garden after moving to Montana. And you can see that here in this photo too, from 1987. The first garden was in 86. But what you also see, going back to the condition of the land when we first got here, is all of this barren area along the road. Previous residents had bulldozed that and sold off the topsoil. From what it looks like, because we've only heard little snippets of stories people have told us about this, it could have been as much as a third of the whole 5-acre place that they did that to, that area along the road. And so that was all rocks and weeds, and then you can see also around the house just barren and knapweed, which is a weed, an invasive weed that survives drought and all kinds of things, but it also can be killed by water, which we discovered. There's Barb and the kids and her dog standing there. And so I tell this here also from 1985. You can see the condition of the ground around us. And so I tell the young people that come out here who say, hey, I'd like to do what you're doing sometime. We'd like to have a little farm, you know, and live directly from the land. I tell them, well, that's great, and if you do, don't go to some place that's already pristine and wonderful and has a very functional wild ecosystem in place, and then start digging it up, or heaven forbid, cutting down any trees. Go to one of the many places in our world where industrialism has destroyed it, where colonialism and high-tech industrialism have destroyed the land, and began the process of healing and regeneration. And I say this as a person who discovered that after we moved here. We had the good fortune of coming to a place like this and receiving an offer to buy a place without even putting a down payment on it, just making payments. And that was our blessed good fortune. And then we realized later the value of helping our Mother Earth heal from the wounds of anthropocentrism and humanity's attempt to control everything. So, very quickly, I'll start moving a little quicker here. Here's the first garden, 1986, and you can see, oh, yeah. So the other part of the destruction of this land, besides the bulldozing and selling topsoil, was overgrazing. And so the previous owners had quite a bit of horses, too many horses for 5 acres, and much of it was overgrazed, and they kept all the horses in this area I showed you here, and you can see it a little better in this photo after we turned it into a garden, that rectangular area. When we got here, that was about 1.5 feet deep, just nothing but horse manure, pretty much, and some dirt. Very compacted. I couldn't get a shovel in to the ground there. It had been so compacted with many horses penned up in that area. And that was the only time we ever allowed a tractor with a plow onto the land, was to break that ground initially, and then after that we used smaller tools, and now we only use hand tools. But anyway, that was the only time, and so that was wonderfully rich soil. And as you can see there, these tall plants, I don't know how well you can see that. There's corn there, and right there are sunflowers. And look at how large those sunflowers got. That is a standard official size, NCAA official size basketball there in the middle. And those are the heads of some of the sunflowers, some of which, as you can see, are more than twice the diameter of that basketball. And many other of the crops from that first garden were just enormous and very robust. And then here's the picture of our garden, year 2, 87, with Barb and the kids working there. And I joined them after I took the picture. They didn't do all the work. And it was nice when the kids were young enough to love working in the garden. Of course, you know, they all grow up and get other interests. That's fine. And here is, I wanted to show you what another thing that we did besides planting the garden in that very rich soil was we took some of that soil by wheelbarrow and put it in this backyard area here and planted a little low maintenance natural lawn there, and with low soil, what's it called? Low, not very much thirsty grass seeds, and a little chamomile, yarrow, and what is it, some of the other items that were in that seed packet. Anyway, oh yes, the clover, much clover. So things that don't need a lot of water, and that's the only place we keep a lawn, is right there. There's my grandkids in 2011 enjoying the lawn, dressing up in silly costumes, something they used to like to do. Of course, they're all kind of grown up now, pretty much, all the grandkids. And that big rock there is the same rock you see in this photo up here. Okay, so in 2002, we lost our oldest son and began taking care of his 2 kids, those 2 of our grandkids. And that summer I built this playground for them, But at the end of that summer, and this is all very therapeutic for us. At that time, we lost him to a car wreck, and it was truly devastating to the whole family and all his friends. And at the end of that summer, I got this feeling for bringing water into that field there and healing the field and getting rid of the knapweed, as I found out that knapweed doesn't like a lot of water. And what we also discovered is that water would bring out all the dormant seeds and bring back the native grasses. As you can see, the upper part of the field that wasn't bulldozed still had some native grasses in it and was in pretty good shape. So I began digging there at the end of the summer, and then had to go back to teaching the new semester, new school year. And so in 2003, I continued this process of just using a pick and a shovel and wheelbarrow. And I should say also that at the south end of the what they call property, which we call the home, is a irrigation canal managed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, as we're on a reservation, where we get our water from our irrigation water, and we just pay a small fee annually for that. And so there was also a ditch coming out of the irrigation canal that ended right there, just kind of a ditch to nowhere. And that's where I started this process of bringing water out into the field. So you can see the years, I should mention, 2003, and then it goes from there out here. And at first I was going to make all these curves and nooks and crannies to more mimic nature, but the process was so slow. I just wanted to get the water going so it became more of a straight line. And then when we got towards the end, I made a series of ponds that were more mimicking nature again, little tiny ponds that were wetland area. And I'll get back to that later. So that was the beginning of bringing new life into the field. And this brings me to what are the elements of regeneration. As you can see, 2003, 2004. And those elements are, first, water. So that water that goes through the irrigation canal behind our place comes from the Jocko River across the road from us. And in that water are the nutrients from fish and aquatic insects. And even though the BIA put up a little fish screen to keep the trout from getting into the canal, the little minnows and small fish still come in. And so all of those nutrients, and even from the neighbor's cattle, which you don't want in your drinking water, but their nearby droppings and whatever they put in the water is also another source of nutrients. So water flows and carries all kinds of nutrients out into the field in this type of low-level flood irrigation. And the other elements are the nutrients themselves, and also the nutrients from our neighboring other species that come in and are attracted by the new life coming into the field. And that would be deer and elk and bears come in, and they all leave their droppings, their poop in different places, and the little creatures, the rodents and pack rats and squirrels and chipmunks, and so they're all bringing nutrients. And then because we planted trees and allowed those to reproduce, that attracts more birds, and the birds are much more frequent visitors and inhabitants of the land now. All kinds of species, especially in the spring, because we have so many more trees now. And so the birds bring not only their own droppings and nutrients, but they carry seeds with them very often, or they'll move seeds around from the plants to the wetlands, and they'll just plant themselves. And the other two elements of regeneration, eco-regeneration, are, of course, the sun and human labor. And in our case, that's low-tech, non-fossil fuel labor, as much as that is possible. And it's increasingly we've moved away. We moved away from all fossil fuel tools years ago, and then we were using lithium battery tools, and we still have some of those, but I'm going to phase that out too eventually, because of what I've learned about the mining of lithium and all of that, and just because humans should no longer live in these enormous invasive manners. We need to go back to pre-industrial technology to save what's left of the natural world. And so 2004, 2007, the trees are a little bigger. Then I will go into all of these other ones. There is one more thing about trenches and ditches. Well, you can see those same areas in 2022. That's a considerable. What happened with the water coming in is seeds from the trees themselves. So this is another part of the regenerative process. You know how the cottonwoods send off seeds that float in the air every June, and so do the poplars that we planted around the house, which are close relatives of the cottonwoods, and they land in the wetlands and propagate themselves. And so forests arise without us having to do much of anything. I planted a couple of trees, the maple trees you see there, but what created a whole community along that ditch that I dug in 2003 and 2004. I did have a little help from one of my friends who works for the irrigation system there. He offered to bring a little bobcat excavator in when he saw how much I was digging by hand in all that rocky ground. And, so I gratefully accepted his offer. And so some of the digging from right about there to down to where the ponds start, and there's a picture that, going down that hill, to there. They did, and a little bit along the fence line that was very rocky. Those guys dug with their little excavator just in one day, doing work that it would have taken me probably months to do. But I went back over what they dug and did it by hand to get it to the depth I wanted it to go. They kind of broke the ground, and then I finished that. So this one we're looking at here was something I came back and did later, totally by hand, with hand tools. And what I did was go from the ditch that I had previously dug, and this is in 2005 now, and just created additional kind of spillways that spilled into the area that had been previously bulldozed many years or decades before. And so what you see in this photo and the next one is the changes in the land. That far corner, the east end of the property, that was where we first let water in before I dug any of these other ditches. It just kind of came when we began to increase our use of the canal for the old garden. There is a spillover effect into that end. And the water doesn't get wasted. It just goes into the soil and then into the water table. It just soaks in. And so you can see the dramatic difference in terrain just from that addition of water and nutrients coming from the river through the canal and then through the ditches. Dramatic signs of healing, and I hope I'm getting a good focus. I probably should be wearing my glasses. Okay, and then there's some more of the same things over time. Well, all of those were from 2005, so we'll go to the other years now and kind of wrap this up. Back to 2003 there, where you can see the line and some of the cattails that are coming up. Even prior to that, there had been some wetland development there. I think it just must have been a natural low spot. And then we chose that natural development of a wet area in the destroyed land, and noticing that's where the life was in that land, and then enhanced it with further digging and allowing more water to come in. And there you see that. And this view from 2007 of the pond area is captured in this photo, but life is so thick there you can't see the house. And in 2022 in the spring, I took a photo before the trees had leafed out, and so you could see through them to see the greenhouse and the house as it is today. And then I took another one from the exact same spot, and in the end of the summer, when it's all lush and you can't see anything but something that looks like a jungle. And yeah, there's another view in 2011 from a distance of what I'm talking about, the pond area and the jungle of cottonwoods and poplars that just planted themselves. And I didn't mention the willows too, the native willow trees that also just start popping up when life is present and when habitat is present, they plant themselves and stimulate themselves. Okay, I'll try to be aware of where my camera is pointing. Okay, and so here you see also from the road looking in, just you'd never guess that that area had been treated so horribly before and had been so damaged just decades before this. Well, I guess at that time that would have been about 20 years earlier when we first got there. No, that's 2014, about 30 years. Okay, thought I saw 2004 at first. No, 30 years. You see all that healing and abundant life. We've had many herbs come in that some of them are medicinal, like St. John's wort and all the mint that lives in there. And we planted a little comfrey, and it has reproduced itself profusely, which comfrey does, given the right conditions. So that's the east end that was first watered there with limited flooding and trenches. And so the rest of this is just more examples of the same thing. We'll go back here to 1985 one more time, and my daughter Faith when she was little, and you can see the barren ground, and that same view later in 2011, just the dramatic difference. Also, we have an addition to the house there and a deck. 2004, kind of a similar angle, a little different, but and then that angle 2007, and so on along the road 2003, 2004, and you can see the growth of the trees. 2011 again, and then from this angle, a little closer to the house, looking down the road, by 2007 it looked like that. 2011 there, and 2022. Again, this photo was taken in the early spring before full leaf out, or else you wouldn't see the trunks of those trees so well. But they've become very large trees in that short time of less than 20 years. Okay, well, so I hope that is helpful, and like I said, if you want to see more of the actual gardens and the wildlands interface, you can look at some of my garden videos, and I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope it inspires you to do what I think we all need to do eventually to, if we're going to survive and our future generations survive the collapse of the money world and the artificial system. Okay, well, fare thee well.